Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. We have a really interesting event with Levels.fyi talking about how they bootstrapped with Google Sheets. I'd like to introduce Zuhayeer, Musa, and Zaheer Mohiuddin.
Hey everyone, it's good to be here. I think this is like our third or fourth event with Women Who Code, so awesome to be invited back. Um, yeah, and today's presentation is going to be about how we kind of bootstrapped and got our early beginnings on Levels.fyi with Google Sheets. And joining me is my co-founder and our CEO as well, Zaheer. I'll let him kind of do a quick intro.
Hey, yeah, excited to be here again. My name is Zaheer. I've been excited to do these events in the past. In the past, we've even done like some of the in-person ones. Yeah, just happy to be here. In terms of my background, I was previously an engineer at AWS, Amazon, and then prior to that, I was an engineer at LinkedIn. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, for those of you who aren't familiar with Levels.fyi, Levels.fyi helps you build a better career with the most accurate insights and services. So tangibly, when you go to Levels.fyi and you type it into your browser, you get to see a whole host of compensation details about different companies, benefits, anything you would want to know really about a company before considering it as your next opportunity. And so this is a screenshot of kind of the site as it is today, which, if I say so myself, it's like, quite nice today, but it wasn't always like this. And so the early beginnings of Levels.fyi kind of looked like this. So this is kind of a very early rendition of a sketch that Zaheer drew up. And you could see, I think the timestamp might be on there, but this was around 6 years ago. And what Zaheer was trying to do was imagining a solution to kind of the original problem that we set out to solve. And the original problem that we were setting out to solve was helping map levels at different companies to each other. For example, there's a lot of different nomenclature around leveling across the industry. Microsoft, for example, starts at 59, goes to 60, all the way up to, I think, level 80. And then other companies like Amazon and Google, they start at L4 and L3 respectively. And so there's very different kind of names all across the industry. And Zaheer can kind of attest to this through personal experience. When switching companies from Amazon to LinkedIn, he kind of didn't know which level to kind of target for as he kind of made the switch. And so we wanted to build a very simple solution to that to help kind of visualize what kind of the leveling schemes at different companies look like. And that was the very initial problem that Levels.fyi kind of set out to solve. So we essentially codified a lot of this information that we got from friends initially into kind of this JSON file to kind of encode kind of the leveling details of an organization. We then put that into kind of like a very basic UI where you can just see how the levels kind of map to each other on a very simple interface. And you can see this kind of on our site today. Like we still have this as a part of kind of the visual experience. And so we essentially, upon building this, we kind of had another realization. And that realization was that companies set compensation bands by level. And so we had this really, really rich data set of leveling across multiple companies. And so we had essentially like heard from a lot of our users that, hey, why don't you start collecting salaries and exposing salaries by these levels? And so we somewhat kind of stumbled into collecting compensation. It wasn't really our first idea, but as we kind of got that idea, we were like, okay, why not just throw up a Google form and just start collecting compensation details from individuals that visit Levels.fyi. And so this Google form essentially poured into a Google Sheet. And that was how we got kind of our infamous start with kind of Google Sheet kind of being almost like our backend. And basically this was the CRUD interface for everything we did related to salaries. Like even viewing, actually, when we first started the website, we would actually just send the Google Sheet out to people, and people would have the link to the sheet, and they could kind of just view each individual row, each individual kind of data point by themselves. But that was starting to become very, very tedious. And people wanted the ability to filter in more advanced ways. And so that's when we essentially threw it into another JSON file. We basically had all the rows of the Google Sheet periodically go into this one JSON file that was publicly accessible. And we basically built a very simple kind of table UI on top of it on our website. And that allowed us to do some very basic filtering, like you can filter by company name, just search for different kind of heuristics, like whether that's the years of experience of an individual, different roles, and kind of just get a little bit of a neater interface to kind of look at this data. And so this Google Sheet at this point is still kind of our source of truth. It's where we're doing all of the processing, even after we had kind of transferred all of the UI to the website. Google Sheet was still kind of our master sheet that we would use to kind of monitor data points, do a lot of our admin work. And at this point in time, like early on, we were actually doing manually reviewing pretty much every single data point that came in. And so as we started gathering more and more of these data points, we started to realize that we had the ability to aggregate this data into averages, medians, and percentiles across different companies, roles, and levels. And so this was the early sketch for what eventually became our average or the modal that you could kind of see when you click on one of the levels for each of the companies. And so you would see kind of the total compensation, the breakdown of the total compensation, and like the details on like the company and the level, which eventually became this, which was our very early version of it on the site. And then as we started collecting more and more data, we were able to do much richer things, such as this, which was being able to kind of aggregate the distribution of salaries by level, kind of using some more statistical methods to kind of really get a sense for what a compensation band at a company looks like. And a lot of this you can now view on the site today, but we kind of had to work our way kind of up to here. And all of this was still being powered by Google Sheets kind of on the back end. And with that, I'll kind of hand it over to Zaheer to kind of talk about a little bit about the decision making that went into continuing to use Google Sheets as we grew.
Yeah, so Google Sheets has been like incredible for us, I would say, for multiple reasons. And what we're looking at here is, I mean, when a company needs to store data, you don't typically just have a database. You need several other things. You need to have maybe a BI tool to like analyze that data. You need perhaps like an admin tool to clean or modify data. You need a server with like proper validation to insert data. You need to adjust the schema, manage the schema. Sometimes there's changes that need to be done. Perhaps you have to do like a migration, for instance. And let's say you want to move that data to a different location or modify it in any way, do ETL on that data, create different views of that data. So, what we're looking at here is there's all these different tools that we need that revolves our database. It's not just the database alone. And all of those things we actually get for free as part of Google Sheets, which is why I think it's so powerful and made it so great for us to start with. Doing like a schema change is as simple as like inserting or removing a column. Access control, admin management is done with like just standard Google sharing. Inserting charts is easy to do in Google Sheets. You can see where this is going, where all of the functionality that Google Sheets gives you out of the box, we get access to right away. And you can even extend that with like plugins on Google Sheets and Google Workspace and things like that. And so these things you almost take for granted with a simple like Google Sheets are actually business functions that you would actually have to build yourself if you were using like just a raw database. And so using Google Sheets gave us all of these things for free, and it really helped us scale quickly without having to build all of these things out ourselves. And I think that's really part of like when we look at like where we would spend time and focus and energy and things like that, we didn't have to focus too much on like our database side of things. We didn't have to spend, we spent very little to any time on the database itself. And when I say database, I mean like Google Sheets in this case, because we didn't have to. There was so much provided out of the box. Whereas if we were on Postgres or something like that at the gate, I can imagine how we would maybe had to do like optimizations. Perhaps we'd have to figure out, different querying tactics, set up BI tools and all of that. And we have had to do that now. And I'll kind of walk you through that journey of like how we scaled to where we are today. At some point, it hasn't scaled. Like at some point we did have to migrate off, and although we still use Google Sheets for a lot of other things today, we don't use it for our main salary table. Now going back in terms of like the right path, how we used Google Sheets and Google Forms, and how we still use it today for certain cases. When someone would add something to the site, it would go to a Google form, which would write to a Google Sheet. That was the preliminary, I would say like the most basic rudimentary way that we started doing things. After that, we evolved it to actually add API gateway in between. So this is like an AWS service. And we also had a Lambda in between. Now, what this allowed us to do is because it wasn't going to Google directly, we were able to track, things like for spam detection and things like that. We also do track like IP addresses. We have to get, user headers, make sure that people aren't like submitting duplicates. And so being able to control that write path directly from where the user submits things allowed us to add some of that functionality. It also allowed us to add functionality where, if we had things that wasn't in the right format for Google Forms, then we could modify that format. And it also allowed us to have like rate limiting in place and things like that, so that Google Forms wouldn't get too angry at us if we were like writing too quickly. In the next slide, I'll go over kind of the read path. So on the read side of things, we would fetch data. We couldn't read data from Google Sheets directly. We would hit limitations and bottlenecks. It was actually quite slow to actually call Google's APIs directly. It's not optimized for like a live use case for like heavy traffic as we use it. And so what we would do is we actually had a Lambda that would read from Google Sheets. It would build this like JSON file, and it would write that out to AWS S3. AWS S3, if you're not familiar, it's just a file store. So you can store files on there. And we would have that backed by our CDN, which was AWS Cloud. I always forget the name. CloudFront. I always confuse it with Cloudflare. But AWS CloudFront was our CDN, and that was actually where all of our data was cached. And so when someone loaded the website, it would make a request to our CDN, which was AWS CloudFront, which would make a request, and if that had the data file, it would send it back to the site. If it didn't, then it would actually fall back to S3 and pull the data from there. Now, because we weren't going to Google Sheets directly, we overcame like kind of the limitations of Google Sheets in terms of like network latency, in terms of speed and all of that. And because this Lambda was running, I think it was running like every 15 minutes or something, it still felt real time. We still had all of the data. We didn't need it to be like every single minute. And so even like every 15 minutes or every hour was sufficient for our use case, essentially. Now, in terms of like the caching strategy, I mentioned like this file was really big over time. And so it was important to have heavy caching. And so we had several layers of caching. The first one being on your browser itself. So when someone loaded the data, we would actually cache that file on the browser. And essentially, it was interesting, and a lot of people didn't realize this, but we had every single data point. Our entire database was basically being shipped down to the client. And so there was literally a file, salaries.json. It would have every single, entry essentially of our database in there. And actually, you could actually hit this path today if you go to levels.fyi/js/salary.json.json or something like that. You'll actually still see this file. It's not real salary data. We actually like modified it and like put like phony data in there. It's for like testing, and sometimes people try to like scrape the site, and so it's kind of like a honeypot for that. But that file still exists, and you can kind of see the format and how much data we were shipping down to the clients. Now, that was the first layer was the browser cache. We also had caching on the CDN. Ultimately, it would fall back to S3 if it missed in all of these places. Majority of the time, though, most people would be just using data from their browser or from the CDN, which made it very efficient from like a cost and speed perspective. Now, eventually, we did hit limits. Our salary data grew and continued to grow every single day. You can see kind of a chart here of like, and this is, by the way, just a side note. This chart was generated in Google Sheets itself. And so when I talked about how like we could build BI tooling, like business intelligence, like graphs and things like that, without having to have another piece of software, this is like a perfect example of that, where we had a graph because we wanted to track for ourselves, like how many data points we were collecting every single day. And so we had a graph of that essentially just in Google Sheets, and kind of see that and how it was growing over time. Eventually, we were realizing that we were starting to hit some bottlenecks. And in the next slide, I'll talk about some like the drawbacks of at when we reached this scale, what were some of the drawbacks? So we had this in place for about 2 years or so. But we eventually started to run into issues. The size of the JSON file was growing into several megabytes. I think it was like almost 9 to 10 megabytes or so. It was becoming very, very large. And so every time we missed the cache, it became a huge penalty for the user, especially international users that don't have, lightning fast internet. It would essentially, the site would be extremely, extremely slow for them to load. And, because they would have to download this huge JSON file. Not just that, the file was heavily compressed. And so the browser would actually have to unzip that file when it got to the user's device. And so that process also takes time. And also there's time taken in terms of like processing the file itself, which is like massive to actually render everything on the pages. So eventually, that became an issue. The other issues that we had were, the Lambda functions that I mentioned that pull data from the Google Sheets and put it into S3, they were starting to time out because it was there was so much data that needed to be processed. It also became hard to do analysis. Now, it was easy to do analysis in the early days. There wasn't that much data in the Google Sheets, so we could create charts and everything like off the bat. But at some point, like Google Sheets itself would kind of slow to a crawl. Became like very slow and hard to use Google Sheets itself, and so we needed to, we couldn't just do analysis in Google Sheets. We needed, something a little bit more powerful, and that's where really where like a database comes in is you can do a lot of these queries and quick analytics, and with a ton of flexibility as well. You can't do everything in Google Sheets, and so that's where we started to look at using Postgres or some database basically as a solution. There was also some other issues. I mean, like there was like rate limiting that we were hitting from Google Sheets. And also because we were giving all of our data in a single JSON file, it was easy for other sites to kind of like scrape this data and use it for whatever they choose. We had a bunch of clones created, things like that, which ended up damaging, our like the ecosystem more than helping essentially. And so next I'll talk about kind of like how we migrated off of Google Sheets and what our stack is today essentially. So the way we migrated off of Google Sheets, and this is, if you've ever done a database migration or a data migration, this is like a very standard protocol for how to do any sort of database migration. So typically you would duplicate writes and then you migrate the read path. What that does is, you can imagine at one point all writes were going, any new salary created was going into Google Sheets. The final state of the system we wanted is that all reads and writes are going to the database. So the way that you do this, and again, this is true for pretty much every database migration, is you duplicate writes to both areas. We would duplicate writes to Google Sheets as well as the database. At some point, we did like a copy over of all data in Google Sheets into the database. And so now both systems are at parity in terms of the data that they have. The Google Sheets and database have the same data because we're writing to both. After that, we did the read path migration on the next slide. So we essentially would start reading after it's being written to both places. now it's very easy to migrate the read path, and you can do it kind of one by one. You don't have to even do it all at once. We would slowly migrate all reads to our server, and our server was reading from the database. Now, we still had caching and things like that in place. And so you can see that here where we started moving everything to our read APIs. It was going to our CDN and our load balancer and our API server and things like that. We still had heavy caching because it's, it helps improve performance and all that good stuff. But eventually everything did migrate over to our database. And again, this is a very standard path for like, a database migration. Now moving beyond Google Sheets, what does our stack look like today? It's quite similar in terms of what we just looked at. We have, CloudFront, EC2, RDS, where we actually store our data. These are all AWS like services. We also use like Metabase, which is like another third-party like business intelligence tool. So you can create like graphs and visualizations on the data. Again, before we were able to do this in Google Sheets itself, like I showed you of that graph of the salaries increasing. And then today, the way that we run analytics, so we have all of these pages on the site where we have like averages computed. So like, okay, what is the median salary at Google, or what is the 95th percentile salary for this particular level at Google, or things like that. So all of that is generated via Lambda functions that we have, which on a daily or weekly basis will actually run these queries on the database and generate new tables in the database for all of these aggregated things. So that way, when a user requests like the Google salaries page or whatever, we're not running those computations on the fly. Those are run like once daily and cached essentially in the database itself to be more efficient essentially. And so, yeah, you can kind of see the diagram here. Now, I wouldn't say this is like eventually we'll have to also change pieces of this puzzle to scale even further, right? And so, for example, the way how we do computations today, we're running the computations on RDS itself, but that doesn't scale infinitely. Companies that have much more data, they can't run the computations on the database itself. Oftentimes, they use like another data warehouse or something like a tool like AWS Redshift or something like that, where they actually run that are better designed for running like analytical workloads, right? There's other database systems that are better for running analytical workloads. Now, we haven't hit that bottleneck yet. And so, our modus operandi, or like the way that we develop things, is we always want to keep it simple. And so we haven't hit that bottleneck or that scale limitation. So we're going to keep doing things the way that we've done it, of just running analytics on the database itself. And this, I think, kind of highlights like our personal journey, but also I think, a good engineering journey of not like overcomplicating things or not overbuilding for what the problem is, right? We don't need like Redshift or any of these like analytical tools, and so we don't use them today. But at some point we will, and when we get to that point, we will build on those. And I think it's a kind of a great transition into like if we were to do things differently, which I'll hand over back to Zaheer.
Yeah, and even prior to that, I also want to mention like Google Sheets hasn't left the equation fully for us even today. Today it's not the what's it called, the master, I guess, database. Really, it's not the source of truth, but we still use the functionality that Google Sheets gives us as an interface. So, for example, for kind of some of our customers and some of kind of our own operations in terms of like slicing data, we still export our data into Google Sheets to be able to kind of wrangle it and like process it and ingest it, even because Google Sheets has like built-in kind of access control, and you can even add kind of like they have a very good API that they've built, and so you can kind of do a one-time export of data and then now have like an API access endpoint that we didn't have to build directly into that data. And so even today, we actually use Google Sheets. Now, the problems that we've run into today are that we've hit the limits on Google Sheets itself. So I believe Google Sheets has like a 10 million cell limit, and so we hit that. And we've actually kind of also kind of came up with a solution for that. I don't know how temporary it'll be, but as of now, we basically came up with like almost like a sharding mechanism for kind of Google Sheets itself. So we kind of create like a folder, and we actually create multiple workspaces so that we can kind of operate on like a large data set within Google Sheets. And so we kind of created like this whole auto scaling kind of system where, if it goes beyond like even like, let's say up to like 40 million cells, we'll be creating like 4 or 5 different workspaces so that we can kind of accommodate for that workload. I don't know how long that'll last. I think we'll eventually have to create our own tooling internally. So, but Google Sheets is still very much part of kind of Levels.fyi today. And to answer this question, if we were to start over, how would we do things differently? And I think the short answer for us is we probably keep a lot of things the same. We like even before we kind of worked on Levels.fyi, we were familiar with kind of Google Sheets, how it works. We were familiar with the stack that we had built kind of a lot of our previous projects with. And so we knew kind of, okay, we could get this up very quickly. We can move fast and kind of iterate on this project from like a very, very easy starting point with Google Sheets. And so for us, that worked. And I think ultimately the thing to realize is there's no correct answers here. It's ultimately about the business problem or the problem that you're solving and the things that and the thing that's at hand, as Zaheer mentioned, kind of about not prematurely optimizing for anything, but just solving the problem at hand. And if you've been looking at us with disgust through this whole kind of presentation and saying, and you may be a Postgres whiz, great, do what works for you. You can kind of utilize that stack and move fast. For us, this just happened to be the stack that we were able to move rapidly in. And I think that it just provides commentary on, nothing is sacred. Ultimately, we realize even the stack we have today will have to be rebuilt. We will continuously build and rebuild our stacks for what, for the problem that we have at hand. No architecture is perfect. And so you'll just continually just have to iterate on what you have. And I think what we started with was the best way for us to kind of prove out this concept and kind of understand that like customers actually were interested in visiting this website and were actually interested in this data. And so that was the easiest stepping stone we could take to kind of get that out into the hands of customers and get their feedback to kind of continue to iterate. And so the slide I wanted to close with is eventually we actually even had like an engineering manager at Google working on the Google Sheets team kind of reach out to us, and we actually had like a few meetings with them, and they actually featured us in a few kind of places, and it was very awesome to kind of see things kind of come full circle where we were actually recognized by like the Google Sheets team. It's I think Google Sheets will always continue to play kind of like a role at Levels.fyi. I don't know if it'll be the main thing after a certain point, but the journey that we've kind of come on, it has been very illuminating. Like for me personally, like I learned a lot just at every step of the way. You're kind of solving the problem that's at hand, and you can't be afraid to kind of throw away like things that may have worked previously but won't work anymore. And so nothing is sacred, essentially. With that, we'll go into questions, the Q&A session.
We have a question from Nacho. Early on, based on everything via Google Sheets, did you implement data validation? If so, did you use Google Forms native validation or another option?
Yeah, it's a good question.
I'll go for it.
Yeah, no, I think initially we basically had the Google form. So it was using Google Forms' own validation. After a certain point, we actually built our own UI on top of the Google form. So it was still submitting to that same form, but we had our own UI-based validations on the front end to at least kind of, like, for example, autocomplete for like different things like leveling different kind of inputs that you would have. And so slowly we migrated away from Google's native kind of data validation and into kind of our own kind of system. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Zaheer.
Yeah, I mean, when we moved to also use Lambda for writes, we also added some validation on the Lambda side of things. And so that also helped with things a little bit. We can add more custom logic. I think Google Forms had, a decent amount of like knobs that we can turn, but in Lambda we could, write our own logic for validation. So that also helped a bit with validating.
I have a question. How did you get your first users, and how did you continue to iterate on the feedback you got from those users?
Yeah, great question. I think initially a lot of our growth was us kind of spreading the word. And basically, like when we initially had the site with just leveling, it was, the problem that we noticed was, across a bunch of different forums online, whether it was Quora, whether it was Reddit, whether it was even Blind at the time, like people had this continuous question of, hey, I'm like basically the same permutation of this question. Like I'm a Google L5. What role does that translate to at Amazon? And so, me and Zaheer created the site, had those companies up, and would like basically just comment the URL to Levels.fyi under those questions. And eventually we started seeing an organic loop where people that wasn't us were starting to answer like the same thing with the same thing. And so slowly we started adding more and more companies so that we can answer more of these questions. And then eventually it started becoming more and more of a standard. And I think like over time we were just seeing more and more people kind of come from all of these sources that we initially commented on. But really it was just a lot of manual effort on my and Zaheer's side. It was like us kind of scouring the internet, going into these threads, finding where people were talking about this, and then linking them to this solution, essentially. And that was just when we had leveling. Once we got compensation, people are talking about compensation everywhere. And so we started kind of linking to the specific compensation pages we had, and started seeing kind of like an organic effect there. And I think, once we had that organic flywheel going where people coming and contributing and more contributions would also result in more people or more like data, which can attract more people to come back to the site. And so we had this really virtuous cycle that helped us power us through once we got like an initial bearing or initial start with users.
Awesome, thank you.
We have a couple of questions in the chat. Abelicia is wondering about multiple developers working on the Google Sheets and curious how difficult that versioning was for that.
I don't think we ever had to do versioning necessarily. I mean, there wasn't like we never had to do like development on the Google Sheets itself. Oftentimes, like if occasionally we would have to do analysis, and like what we would do in those cases was like a one-time export of the data would be enough to do analysis on. So we would just create a copy of the Google Sheet, do analysis, and then delete the sheet or whatever like after that. If we needed to do any changes on the Google Sheet itself, it would oftentimes be limited, and when we needed to do it, it would be pretty straightforward. You would just I don't know, we just didn't actually use version control for it very much. We did keep backup copies of the Google Sheet because it was like such a important file. Like let's say someone fat fingered, as in like they deleted something or deleted data or something like that. We did have like a backup of the Google Sheet in certain places, like we would keep copies of. But for the most part, I don't think we had to use versioning really.
Michael has a question. He says you've spoken a lot about the evolution of your backend. Has your front end undergone any such sort of similar evolution?
Yeah, definitely. Our front end has also seen almost probably like equal in magnitude. It's very I guess it's more invisible, just because we try to keep the user experience the same as much as possible. But on the front end, most of our site was actually very static. Initially, it was basically HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files. We had a little bit of a templating framework, but it was very very vanilla JavaScript, very vanilla, like no frameworks, kind of us just like just a very simple front end. From there, we actually, as we started like scaling out our pages, creating pages for companies, for compensation pages, levels, roles, all these pages that we had to kind of scale it out to, we did migrate to Next.js for kind of those portions. But as of today, even our homepage is still on kind of the legacy kind of front end. And so we have like, I want to say like less than 5% of our site kind of on our legacy kind of front end framework, whereas the rest of it, which are like the core pages, which are on kind of Next.js, and to be clear, like even on Next.js, we actually statically generate these pages, and have like a very robust caching strategy just to ensure that it's performant, and we really don't need to update things that frequently on each page. And so it still works for us to be able to kind of have just static site generation. And we use this technology also called ISR, which is like intermittent static regeneration. So every time, at any time there's like basically like a time period of 6 hours or so, we kind of regenerate these pages in a way that doesn't stress the server. So each page is kind of generated like there's like a timeout across like all of these kind of regeneration periods, so that it doesn't stress the server all at once, like on a deploy or something like that.
I'm going down the list of questions to catch up. Rapakshay asks how you raise investments and what your future plans for revenue flow are.
Yeah. In terms of that, we raised investment from mostly like angel investors. And in terms of like future plans for revenue, the way that we have revenue today is mostly on two fronts. The first is on consumer side. We have a number of services for candidates. So we help people with everything from interview preparation to resume reviews, and even negotiating their offers. And that's actually our most popular service, is helping people negotiate job offers. We help people get thousands of dollars, if not tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes even hundreds of thousands of dollars more on their offers. We have a team of coaches, which are all like experienced recruiters, who have negotiated on behalf of companies, and they're the ones that are helping candidates now negotiate against companies. And so those services are very popular on the consumer side of things. And then on the enterprise side of things, the same data that you see on the website, we actually also sell to companies. Companies, especially compensation analysts, the people that are deciding compensation at your company, they also need to have a good sense of what's happening in the market. And so we sell, we package, although they care about what's happening in the market, they care about very different things than what consumers typically care about. They want to see data in different slices. They want to see it visualized in different ways. And so we package that data very differently on the enterprise side of things, and sell that to them. So we have a number of large clients, several Fortune 500 companies, as well as like trading firms that we work with there.
Thank you. Zaheer, have you ever evaluated the market size of this venture at the early stage? What made you determined to work full-time on this product?
Yeah, I think
go for it.
Yeah, the great thing about Levels.fyi was that it started off as a side project for us. So we actually didn't even start out full-time on Levels.fyi. I was in college at the time, and so I was kind of just working on it nights and weekends. And I would meet up with Zaheer every now and then to kind of just put some work in. And it almost kind of the effort that we started to put in towards the when we kind of started going full time on it, was it was essentially pulling the work out of us at that point, and we realized that we had something like a huge opportunity in front of us. We were also making a little bit of revenue at the time through ads, and so the decision became very easy for us to go full time because we were making enough money. We had so much work that we were essentially full time on our side project, and Zaheer was almost like treating his job as like the side project by the end of it. And so we both kind of decided like, okay, it would be best to go full time. We're spending so much time on it anyway. We're making a little bit of money. And so that is what kind of drove our decision. In terms of the market size, like, I don't think we did like a very explicit exercise. It was just over time, we started seeing all this demand, and we started seeing how much of a problem it was, how deep of a problem it was for people to kind of evaluate their compensation. And I think what we realized was, we were essentially a niche. Like, we were focused on the tech niche for compensation data, for kind of benefits information, for careers. And we saw an opportunity to be the best place for people to come. And I think, like, generally the tech industry is a growing kind of market, and a market that will kind of continue to kind of flourish. And, our logic there is like, we want to be a significant part of that.
Great. John asks, are there any potential restrictions that employers might place on employees in sharing their compensation that concerns you?
I tend to think that things are almost going in the opposite direction, if not almost like, with the laws that we're seeing coming out in several states, California, Seattle, New York, with the salary transparency laws that are mandated now for employers. I think if anything, it's almost going in the other direction, where the rights for kind of employees to share compensation information is only increasing. But that said, I think in some places it may still be kind of like, and this is more international rather than within the US, I think it may be a little bit more taboo and much more of like something that has to be, or isn't a practice that is like, as common as we see in the United States, at least. But I think like within the US, at least, like employers, it's very much like a right for employees to kind of share their compensation information. And I believe it's actually protected by federal law. And so if anything, this may be a concern outside of the US. But even then, like, what the experience that we've had is that the best employers tend to embrace this because they want to attract the best talent, and they want to attract the people that the people that would be best for their company. And so being transparent about these things is actually in their favor.
Yeah, that's a good point. I would think they would be, if they're a top employee, they would be proud of having that salary visible. Satya asks, how do you see the product evolving with AI?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's one we're thinking about still. But there's a lot of aspects of the site that are subtly influenced, like, with the help of AI. And one of the kind of products that I think is probably like one of our more recent products is the jobs board that we created. So if you go to levels.fyi/jobs, you kind of have a rich set of filters that you can kind of like filter like job openings by. And so as a part of that, you'll notice like there are like descriptions and things, kind of just different heuristics about the company. And a lot of these things, for example, the short description that we have has been kind of, we've used the help of AI to kind of help generate a lot of this kind of data from like larger blocks. So say like we have like a really large description about a company, we're able to shorten it, we're able to like piece it into like a category, we're able to do a lot of things to kind of categorize the data. into different buckets that manually would be tedious, but with the combination of AI and kind of some manual oversight, it becomes a very, very easy process. And I think a lot of what we want to do going forward is also thinking about things like how we can take a set of data points and estimate salaries, like using kind of AI tools for different areas and using different assumptions. So for example, let's say we know that a data scientist, or let's say we know that a software engineer in Canada, I don't know if this is true, but I'm just making it up, but if a software engineer in Canada on average makes 15% less than a software engineer in the US, can we use kind of this assumption and apply it to like another kind of role? For example, data scientists. Maybe we don't have as much data points for data scientists in Canada, but we can now apply this assumption of that 15%. And I think AI can do this at a much broader scale with much broader heuristics, things like the stage of a company, the headcount, all of these kind of data points to kind of help kind of extrapolate almost like what compensation could be in different parts or different areas, different markets, different roles. We still have to explore that. So, I mean, today, all the data that you see is kind of submitted and kind of represents an original data point, but we would likely have some, different treatment of any data that's extrapolated.
Okay, going up to Pratt's asks that, as you mentioned at the start, the whole real data file was being cached on the client. And as I saw, original sheet has real names with their salaries. Was there any challenge or issue raised for privacy? There's a second
We
part.
had real names. We never collected names. We still don't collect names, actually.
It's all anonymous, right?
It's all anonymous. Yeah.
Okay. So the second part was not sure if it's the right place to ask. I saw you got funding from seed. Any interesting story there?
Sorry, from where? From seed?
From seed?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it was an interesting story necessarily. We kind of raised capital from like primarily like angel investors. That was our first and only round of funding so far. There's just a lot of yeah, I don't think there's necessarily any. It's kind of the standard, like it's a little bit different because we're going to angels first, but it was, I would expect it to be like a typical like seed or angel round.
Okay. Michelle asks, I believe Google Sheets is completely free to use. Is the product currently running in the AWS free tier? And if not, when did you start incurring costs?
We had AWS credits for I believe like 2 years or so. So we were running on the free tier then. Now we do have to pay. Our bill is in like the single digit thousands per month. It's not like, I would say it's not super high. We're quite lean and quite efficient, I would say. But yeah, we did start incurring costs in essentially like year 2, 3 onwards. As our traffic grew and things, like costs increased as well because we have to pay for like bandwidth and all that good stuff. So over time it's been increasing. In the early days it would probably be like a few $100s per month. Whereas now it's much larger, but still I would say reasonable.
So a follow-up for that, I'm curious how many engineers you've had through the years working on this product. You started out with the two of you part-time. Where are you now?
We're quite lean still. So we're still less than we're about 10 people. And we've always had our engineering team in like the 5 to kind of 7 range. It's always been quite small. And we've been able to keep things like very lean, and I think everyone on the team like packs like quite a punch. Like they're very strong contributors, ICs, product people, all of that sort of thing. So yeah, I mean it's quite a lean team. And I think most people are oftentimes like surprised when we say that we're less than 10 people or about 10 people. And we've been able to keep it that way just because I think everyone's a very strong contributor.
Right. So those first 2 years where you had AWS credits, was that part of a small business program?
I believe it was through, yeah, like they're pretty generous with credits. I think they give credits to like most small new startups essentially.
Mhm. Okay.
And we also had like Zaheer had participated in some like I forget what exactly it was, some like VC like program thing. And so he was able to get some credits through that as well.
Oh, I see. Daphne, with the custom form for the data validation in the early stages, at any point did you use Google Apps script? Was any of it written in some other language in the AWS side to output the custom form?
I don't think we used Google Abstract. I think we might have experimented with it at some point, but I don't think we ever ended up using it.
Yeah, I think to give you context, this was like when we first started, it was like 2017. I think Google Apps Script was still very early. Or perhaps, I mean, may have been out, but I think like the community around it and like how to use it wasn't as well documented as it is today. And so a lot of the analysis and stuff that we were doing was kind of just on our own, like the workflows and things like that.
Mary asks, is the speed and clean design of Levels.fyi a part of thinking from an accessibility lens?
I think
Speed you mentioned?
Yes,
speed and
speed
cleanliness.
and clean design. Were you thinking from an accessibility lens at the beginning?
Yeah, I think we've always kind of wanted the site to be as easy to use as possible, and boiling it down to its essence and the simplicity that it provides would, make it as accessible as possible to anyone who visits the site. I think we still have some work to do in terms of making the site fully accessible. I think the newer parts of our site, if you go to the Next.js parts, which are like the company pages and some of the benefits pages, like you'll actually find it to be more accessibility friendly. But the homepage and some of the other pages, we still have some work to do in terms of like being fully, I think there's like an accessibility score that you get through Lighthouse. I don't know what our score exactly was. I think we're in like the 80s. But yeah, like I mean, I think we always wanted to, like the way we've kind of thought about the interface is always boiling it down to its essence and keeping it very simple and letting the user get to what their desired kind of information is as quickly as possible. And which is why like on the home page there's a lot of quick interactions that get you the data that you need. And you don't have to navigate to another page necessarily. You can just click around and rapidly like see different pieces of information. So that's always been in our ethos. And I think like if you have any feedback on that, I mean, would love to hear from you too. So you feel free to email us, or you can reach us at hello@levels.fyi.
Okay, just a follow up from Pratt's that she said it when you were talking about, I believe that this is the context, talking about AI and calculating Canada salaries. Correct me if I'm wrong, Pratt's, but it actually helps employers, mostly especially who don't have predefined levels, but please don't do that for Canada, else the range will never increase. So basically more prominent after CAD has weakened 30% for the past few years. Sathya, what are some global trends you're seeing with tech hiring?
I think things are picking up a little bit. Things have been decreasing for the last couple of months, say several months, but we're starting to see, early signs of recovery, I think. I still would hold out till early next year to see the biggest signs of recovery. companies typically do like annual planning and things in December, January timeframe. That's when they set their like the number of requisitions, the number of like people that they're going to hire, things like that. And so I would imagine like really, although hiring is starting to pick up slowly, like really early next year, probably mid next year is when we'll start to see a recovery. Obviously, no one can predict, but that's when I would kind of expect to see things.
Yeah, that said, like I think the tailwinds have been quite positive in the last couple months. Like we're starting to see all the big major kind of like, let's say Amazon, Facebook, Google, they're hiring at the mid-level, and above. Though lower in volume. I think the concern here is now that, the headcount planning at the beginning of the year, like earlier last year, was much larger than what companies, actually are planning to do now. And so you're starting to see like less kind of volume in hiring, but it is happening. Like people are hiring, and they are like and to the question that John Ball had asked, or like had kind of commented underneath this as well, is like the pendulum has swung to employers, but I think for the most lucrative candidates, they are still getting compensated quite well, and we see that through our negotiation service. We're able to help like candidates negotiate even if they have a single offer, and they're unemployed at the time of getting the offer. We're still able to help them if they are like really like good talent, or they've done well in the interviews. And I think the reason for that is like I think companies are just more selective on talent now, especially with kind of the growing talent pool overall. And so companies are just a little bit more selective, but they're still paying very competitively for that top talent, is kind of the conclusion that we've kind of come to. I think one other area that we kind of seen some positive tailwinds in is, we're mostly referencing software engineering. That's where the largest corpus of our data kind of represents. But if you look at hardware engineering, there's actually like almost there's a deficit of engineers in the space, relative to all of the advancements going on, particularly like there's AI, there's NVIDIA with kind of graphics cards, and a lot of kind of developments, I think, in kind of hardware with not as much of talent supply to support it. And so our prediction there, and though it hasn't like really manifested yet, is that compensation for hardware engineers will increase because there's, it's a basic supply and demand. Like there's increasing demand for a like shrinking supply of kind of engineers in that kind of category. So we'll see how that plays out. That's like kind of like a prediction that we've kind of made.
Hey, I'm surfacing some questions that I'm getting in direct message, I think accidentally. As Levels FYI gets larger, is it competing as an industry leader with larger companies that have been doing this industry salary reveal for a long time?
Sorry, is a question like, are we
Yeah, it's a
competing or-
question.
Okay.
She asks, so basically, as you're getting larger
Mm-hmm.
in the industry and competing with the long-term larger companies, are you basically exceeding them? Are you best in show yet?
I think we're best in show in terms of software engineering and tech pay. I think people trust us more than like the traditional people would typically go to like a Glassdoor or Indeed or PayScale or Paysa or one of these other sites. And I think in some sense we've people trust us more than those existing places. So we definitely are competing on that playing field, especially within the tech sector. We aren't, I think, as competitive in other sectors and other roles. And that's something that I think will be important in the next, couple months and years to grow into.
Right. Bansolve, what do you look for in a product management function at a company of your size? What makes those PMs strong in your eyes?
I think creativity is one. Strong product intuition is another. being able to, come up, both be creative as well as like have intuition of like what works or what doesn't. And I think the biggest thing is like strong communication and organization are also important. So being able to like communicate ideas, communicate like different things, and then organization in terms of just being able to, a big part of a product PM's job is to actually communicate with engineering and do that handoff. And so being able to like, organize that communication functionally correctly is like extremely important as well.
Yeah, I think also dealing with ambiguity at a startup our size, like you know, everything's not going to be filled out for you, and so like being able to kind of take an idea and just fill in the gaps where needed, and basically get it as quickly as possible in the hands of users is great. I think I also like personally, I guess, value technical skills in a product manager, at least at a company our size, just because they're able to interface with engineers better and be able to kind of understand like the kind of the technical works, like the workload necessary for like different tasks, and be able to kind of prioritize things accordingly. And by technical, I don't mean like you have to know kind of the minute details. It's more like having kind of an understanding of the lay of the land, how different stacks work, how you would how like basically projecting almost like a timeline of how long it might take to do certain things, and having an understanding of like the system that you're working in, which I do think you can learn on the job as well.
Great. Swati asks, do you have any measures currently to identify fake data? For example, someone enters fake salary. I know it's a hard problem to solve, but curious to know if you discard the outliers.
Yeah, we have a number of measures in place. I mean, among like we have a whole admin panel that takes into account like various signals, and I wouldn't like we have a ton of different signals that we look at, including reviewing averages. We have verified data that we collect, looking at like unique user like accounts, submissions, IP addresses, like there's a ton that we do to, data quality and data accuracy is like the number one concern. And so I won't delve into all of it, but we have a ton of different signals that we use, that we have both automated checks in place, and then we also have manual reviews in place from like our admin team. And so it's a combination of like a lot of different things.
Okay, so back to Mary. Are you adding new features? Curious about how you think about the website, how the website is being used by your users.
Yeah, we're adding like new features constantly. We just recently released some updates for our mobile app, which brought in, we previously had it focused on our community, but we recently added salary data functionality to it. And additionally, we've been, this is a little bit further back, but we released like a job board for users. So we're constantly releasing like new functionality. I mean, that's something that like, every week or every day, on a daily basis, we're pushing things. Now, it's not always user things, maybe on the enterprise end, but like essentially on a daily basis, we're constantly pushing functionality.
When did your job board go live?
That was early this year, I think.
Okay.
Oh,
did he drop?
yeah, I don't know what happened, but yeah, I'm forgetting the exact date, but I think it was almost like the beginning of this year. Thinking, I believe sometime in January, but we've been adding like pretty significant updates to it. So like even in the last month, we've added, for example, the ability to subscribe to job alerts, so that you're automatically notified of job openings for a specific set of filters. We've added more robust filters to like things like company valuation, company size, the funding stage of a company, and just made it more robust over time as well. Yeah, and kind of would love to get people's feedback on it as well. If you've used it, love to hear from you.
Great. Okay. Rapaski, based on the presentation, it seems like Google Sheets is not scaling well. Are there engineers working on building your own infrastructure? What are the major blockers on moving off of Google Sheets?
Yeah, so we are actually technically off Google Sheets now. We have built our own infrastructure. We use Amazon RDS. We have a Postgres instance. We have kind of our own kind of architecture, like kind of as the source of truth. We still do use Google Sheets, but it's not kind of we're not using it as the source of truth, or that's, it's not bearing all the load. It's more of we use it as a visual interface to kind of connect to our own infrastructure and our own data today. So we do have our own infrastructure in summary.
Bansal says, who manages your services arm? Resumes, the interview prep, negotiation service. How do you split headcount resources between primary engineering and these consulting services?
Yeah, so we have one person on our team who kind of helps manage all of the services side and the hiring and kind of just the operational overload or the overhead over there. We're still also like somewhat involved in terms of like building any kind of products that are needed for it. But for the most part, we have like a team of around 30 or so coaches who are kind of recruiters in the industry, and they help on our resume review and kind of negotiation service. They're all kind of contractors, so they have their own day jobs. And then we also have like a marketplace of coaches that are just individual professionals, and so they kind of set their own rates, and they can kind of get booked one-on-one as well on our site. And so I would say the actual management of it is, not like from the engineering standpoint, there isn't really as much. It's more of like I almost want to say it's like optimizing kind of the flow to get users to these services, and that's like a lot of our kind of work and the engineering kind of and the product kind of scope of it. But like the services themselves are very, we've been running it for over, I want to say like 2 to 3 years now. And so it's been fairly operationalized, and we have like a lot of different mechanisms, like even like, we have an SLA for how long it takes for a coach to get back to you. We have like a bunch of kind of internal mechanisms for escalation. All of that is kind of, been processed. We have like process for it internally. And, every now and then we will add like a new process or add new kind of ways to kind of monitor or handle different situations. But for the most part, it's been operationalized. So we have one person kind of dedicated from the team today.
Great. Are there any plans to add features similar to Glassdoor or Blind, like company reviews / culture, or are you sticking more to quantitative data?
Yeah, I think we've done well at the quantitative data, and so we want to keep that edge and continue like innovating on it, ensuring that we capture all sides of, the compensation details. And there's also, outside of just quantitative data there's also total rewards, which, all together with benefits at a company, represents, like a whole package for a candidate. And so, I think there's still more we can do to communicate that better, just generally through the site. But I do think like eventually we'll want to, we have the community already on Levels.fyi where people can kind of discuss different things. If there's anything like they want to talk about, they can tag companies and kind of discuss, different topics. And it is kind of more free form. I think the interesting thing with the reviews from a product standpoint is, how that, what perception that puts in like a consumer, like, or how that affects kind of just, I think there is like this Yelp, like I think they call it the Yelp problem, where when you think of a review, when you think of reviewing someplace, like most of the time it is for like a negative review, because like you're most of the time people are like only incentivized to do it when something goes wrong. And so how do you cultivate like a healthy kind of balance of getting as much objective information as possible? And I think that's just like a whole nother product problem to kind of think about. But I think once we get there, we want to have like a more creative solution to it than just adding reviews or adding like a star rating system. We want to have like a way to kind of really get the the juicy details from folks, and be able to kind of see, paint like an accurate picture about a place. And I think part of that goes into how granular we are with salaries. We want to be that granular with any product that we create in this space. So not just like categorizing like an entire company of like over 10,000 people, like for example, like if you're working at Meta or Facebook, and you're not just leaving a review of the company, but you're leaving a review of the particular team, the particular kind of org that you're in, so that people get an understanding of like the actual organization or the actual team that you're operating in, and not just like just the company at large. Because just getting like a handful of reviews from a company does not tell you much about a company with 10,000 plus people. So yeah, like just going into the nuance more there, and thinking a little bit about that, and how we would deal with anonymity, and like I think like at that point, like verifying identity, things like that as well.
Are you seeing startups or even larger companies clearly hiring more consultants, freelancers, fractional leaders? Any plans to support these roles?
Yeah, we plan to. So we actually do collect contractor. If you go to our compensation form today, we have like a way to select kind of whether it's full-time contract or contract, and we collect it. I think we could do a better job of displaying it and allowing you to filter by it. But that's kind of just a work in progress for us.
So Mary comments, it's a really robust describing the benefit structure at companies. Looking forward to the expansion to include many companies and to include things like DEI, ERGs, and other non-monetary benefits.
Yeah, definitely.
Joey, thanks you for a 2-hour block of your time. We all do. It's very generous of you. This is a long event.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to be here.
Any pieces of advice, including any regrets you'd like to share with fellow engineers who may be planning to build a toy product based on what you've learned from your journey?
Yeah, I mean, is Zaheer in here too? I'd love to get his kind of take on this too. Yeah, but
Yeah, sorry about that. I don't know why
yeah,
my Zoom keeps like dropping.
all good. I think yeah, I'll like briefly, I guess, say that. I mean, I think we touched on this a little bit in the presentation, but I think one of our biggest learnings is not prematurely optimizing for anything. And I think you can kind of sense that through our journey, because it started as a side project. Like we weren't like very like serious, or like we didn't go out to build this like humongous website. We started with a very acute problem, leveling. Started with very acute kind of just visualization of that, and went from there and started and continue to iterate as much as possible till we got to where we are today. And I think that is how most products that are successful are built, is you just put in like a consistent amount of work over a long period of time, and you'll get beautiful results. I think what you have to ultimately do is be patient and kind of see kind of just play with things as they come. And so you're essentially like, I love that you kind of referenced it as a toy product, because that is what you're doing. You're kind of building these toys, these side projects, these almost like unserious things, and seeing if there's a spark to it that can lead to you to like that next step or that fire that you want to cultivate. And so, I always encourage all my friends, like, build a side project, just ship it out there, put it in the hands of users. Even like, like, I think one of my favorite quotes is like, action produces information at an early stage. And, like, just doing something, even if it is like very, I don't know, crude, whatever, like, just putting it in the hands of users and getting some feedback or some information will give you some more more kind of data to back the next move that you make or the next thing that you create. And so, just having that iteration loop be so tight that you're just getting constant feedback and information from, the people that you're trying to serve. I think, just listening carefully to that, you can eventually get to a product that that actually solves their problem. And so, that would be my advice, is like, do little things, but just keep doing them, and try to produce as much information for yourself as possible by constantly releasing things.
Great. We've worked through all of the questions.
Yeah, Zaheer, did you have anything to add to that? I feel like.
No, I was just gonna echo the same. I mean, like, biggest advice would be to continue experimenting, continue building like toy products, and like that's really what, like, yeah, I mean, like, Levels was a toy product at some point. So yeah, just continue building. You'll ultimately have the biggest learnings from there.
So we had you on last in October of last year. And since then, you've had a job board. You've added your job board. Are there other features you've added since then? And what can you announce for the future?
Yeah, I mean, the job board has been the biggest one. I think a lot of the last couple of months have been on the enterprise side of things. We've been effort. More recently, we also had on the consumer side the improvements in the app. So we have like a new version of the app where we added more salary data. In the future, I would expect more love to be given to the app, as well as work on like the job board, as well as general like improvements across the site. I mean, I think more recently we've been focused a lot on like the enterprise side of things and building that side out, just because it's a new offering. And so there's a lot of like initial groundwork that we have to do there to catch up in terms of like parity with like the consumer side of things. But yeah, that's been like some things to expect, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we've also for the first time this year, we released a mid-year compensation report on our blog. If you haven't seen it, we can probably link it somewhere here.
Okay.
But that kind of gives you some insight into the latest ongoings of compensation, which specific areas is experiencing the most growth, which, and kind of like what companies are paying the most. And so, that report has been quite helpful for folks. We've also added like a lot more coverage, I want to say, over the last kind of couple of months. Is we've added a ton more companies, different kind of roles and titles. And so you should be able to see like data, just more data overall for some of these different roles, companies. And if there's like a title or a company that you don't see, I mean, we'd appreciate if you like kind of added it. We have different parts of the site where you can kind of contribute. If you have the leveling for your company and it's not present on the site, you can add that. And then last, and of course, like the most important, is just contributing your compensation. It really helps us a lot. I can drop like a couple of links into the chat here, but it really helps us just to keep things going and kind of being the flag bearers of kind of salary transparency and kind of keeping that momentum going.
Okay, so Zaheer needs to drop off. Thank you, Zaheer, if you're still here. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah,
Huge
appreciate it.
appreciations in the chat for the both of you. It's been very informative. I love the storytelling. And I'm excited to go and look at your website to see your new enhancements and look forward to having you back for another topic.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Yeah, happy to be here, and thanks for hosting us again.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Anytime. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Take care.